Welcome to The Only Meaningful Conversation. I'm Amy Torres, and my guest today is Zenith Virago. Zenith is the co-writer of a book called The Intimacy of Death and Dying, and she is also a celebrant and a death walker. We'll have her explain that to us herself, but for now, great to have you here. Welcome, Zenith.
Thanks, Amy. Good to be here.
Maybe we could start with you explaining what a death walker is and how you come to apply that term to yourself. I've never heard anybody else called a death walker.
Sure. Well, as many of your listeners will know, that there's a death, people are waking up to death. They want to be more involved. They want that experience to be healthier for them and for their families. And so many years ago when I started working, responding to invitation to be with people when they were dying or at the ceremonies or at the bedside, people wanted to tag me with the tag of a death midwife or a death doula, but that never felt appropriate for me. So for many years I didn't have a tag. I just did that work, and I said I work with people who are dying or dead or the bereaved. But then after about 10 years, what I realized was that actually I'm accompanying those families or those people. I am walking their journey with them. And that I'm also walking towards my own death as well as I can, so that I die well and the people that love me have a healthier bereavement. And that is really the key of my work. And many people I meet are walking towards their death in the best way they can for themselves, but also to take their families with them so that that journey is as full and as rich as it can be on the inside for everyone involved. And that love that they feel for each other may be transformed into sadness and into loss, but then it will transform itself back again to love, because that is omnipresent for them. It just looks like different things and it feels like different things during that journey.
So you just said several things that are fascinating to me. One of which is that being a death doula or a death midwife is different than walking along through the journey of moving into and through death, and that not only is the dying person doing it, but you too are doing it, because from the moment we're born, we are moving towards death. Yeah. Did I get that right?
Yes, exactly. And because now, especially in America, but globally, and for the last 25 years, I would say, or maybe longer, there have been people like me doing this work in their own countries, in their own communities. There's a huge network of people in America who I've been coming for the last 10 years to meet and to share with. And those people are just busy doing that work. Jerry Grace Lyons, Heather Massey, Karen Van Vuren, all over the States. But what is happening now is that people, there's a quantum mass now. And so there are a lot of programs. And if you've got a program, you have to label it something. And so the concept of doulaing to the death is becoming very popular. It's a very common word now, whereas 5 years ago, a lot of people didn't even know there was a word, never mind what it meant. And that word originally was for birth. And my understanding of that term is that they are there for the spiritual and emotional well-being of the woman birthing and the partner and the family. And so for death, I'm assuming that that's the same. But I think there are many trainings now, and it's important for people to, before they enter into those trainings, to understand what the definition of the term is, and therefore what the work is, because it may not be a fixed term across the country. And that's my experience in exploring that. And so by having the term death walker, people generally inquire because it's odd. But it's really about not doing everything for the family or the person. it's about accompanying them, walking with them, and trying to empower them to wake up their own inherent capacity to do that well. So I'm not overly, my thing is to do myself out of a job. Because if I can guide them and explain things and share information and educate people so that they can do it well within their own family or community situation, they won't need me, or they won't need anybody to come in there, because really it's an intimate, dying is an intimate experience. And some people like to do that alone, and some people like to do it with others. And so be able to know what your options are, consider them fully, discuss them with family and friends, and then make decisions that are the most appropriate for you as the dying person and for your secondary, for your family. Because generally, if it's right for you, it should be right for them, because it's your journey as the dying person. And even the family are accompanying you in that experience. But in there is a great teaching for them and a great preparation. But their work is also to do their work as the person walking with the dying person.
So this raises some very interesting issues. First of all, I appreciate that you're mentioning both the practical aspect of dying and including the family in decision-making. And yet, for the most part, the dying person gets to clarify the living will, their estate, what kind of funeral they would like, what sort of burial they would like. And yet you're also spanning all the way to the mystical, it seems to me, where I think it might have been Osho who said that from the moment we're born, this life is all about preparing for death and having a good death. For those of us who believe in reincarnation or the ability to transcend coming back time and again, or having a dream within a dream, death is a huge opportunity.
It is, but it's omnipresent, and it walks alongside us all the time. And so even if you don't believe in reincarnation or have a concept of something beyond death, and no one really knows, these are all just beliefs. Some people have had personal experience because they nearly die and come back again, but that I haven't got that, so I can't speak to that. But what I do know from my work, from sitting with people who are dying and talking at a very real and deep level with them, but in a very simple way, that it is an internal experience. So it doesn't matter if you've got everything planned on the outside, if you're in a beautiful room, if you've made all the plans for your funeral, and you are terrified of the concept of dying on the inside. But you can be in a room with no windows, or a window that looks onto the brick wall of the house next door or the apartment block, because I'm speaking in New York right now, and be okay on the inside. Or you can be in an accident on the side of the road and you have 2 minutes to live, and the ambulance is flashing, everything's going on, people are trying to save your life, but you are actually dying. Or you're out hiking, you slip somewhere and you can feel that you're going to die, you're alone. So it's the sudden death that we also have to be prepared for, not just this expectation that we'll all die in a bed with good medical treatment and our family around us. So in those situations, the more you prepare for that possibility every day, just say with 1 cup of tea, with 1 cup of coffee a day, to contemplate your own death, the more you will be in communication with others, whether that's in writing or verbally, by letting them know that you're okay with dying, that you've lived a good life, you've lived that on your own terms, it's been rich and full, they've been part of that journey for you, and you're grateful to them or not, whatever the dynamic of that friendship or family relationship is. But if you are okay with that, when you die, then the people around you will support them. So, for example, if I die while I'm traveling away from family and friends, which I travel a lot now, that my friends, when I die, will think, wow, she really lived that life. She knew that death was possible at any moment. She wasn't afraid of that. She explored that. And so they will have a trust that even whatever circumstances that I die in, on the inside, I will be ready for that moment. And I'm ready for the loss of that human existence and my connection to family and friends, connection to everything I know. And so that is a great gift to give to family and friends, because it supports them in their loss. But really, they have to do that work themselves. So to practice for your own death, but also for the death of people that you love. Because often people will say, I'm good about death. I'm good about dying. I've lived a long time. And then I say, yeah, and how do you feel about your children dying? And they often say, I'm not okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is a great practice for once a day, for 5 minutes, to let that thought in, to be able to sit with it and grow it. So that if a child does die, or the child of one of your friends does die, you will have something to sustain you on the inside that will allow you a familiarity of preparation that may assist you to be of use to yourself and to others.
So what I'm taking from what you're saying, and there's many layers to it, but going back to earlier, you mentioned love, how people can feel a loss and deprived of the person who died, their love. And so it can seem like there's now a missing piece in the life of the one who is left behind, the living. And yet I've found, and I definitely came from that place, I was raised to measure love by how devastated I would feel if I lost the person.
Yeah.
Which, of course, was a kind of inner torment all the time. And so
right.
it led me to explore. And what I discovered was that love cannot die. And it is the thing that remains, all the memories of that person. And as you then move towards the presence of that person. So, Zenith, if a person simply says, I'm good with death, but when you probe a little deeper, you find out, well, maybe I think I'm good with my death, but certainly not the death of my children.
Yeah.
As one does this 5-minute practice each day and contemplates and maybe journals about what death is to me, and to really be honest with myself, to excavate my deepest fears, and then to find the possibility within them for something full of wonder, let's say. There's a presence. I think our presence brightens. And if, there were to be an accident while you were traveling and suddenly you weren't here, or a car accident, something that takes us by surprise, maybe hiking and there's a fall, that what remains behind, the residue of the person, is bright, that there's a certainty in their presence that somehow comforts us even through our grief.
Well, our love for each other makes them part of us. And so we're most familiar with the aspect that we're most familiar with of someone is their physical presence, their body. We see that. But somewhere we know we're not our body, we're not our mind, we're not our responses to things. Most people believe that when we die, something leaves the body. And you can term that the spirit, the essence, consciousness, being, the soul, whatever name you want to put on it. Now, some people don't believe that. They believe that the body is organic, and when it dies, that's it, full stop. And who knows the answer to that? No one. They're just beliefs that we have that allow us to live the best we can. And sometimes it's comforting to have a belief that supports us. But some people, if they feel that something lives on, the people who have that belief will believe that about the person who's died, and they will have a response to that loss. And sometimes we're conditioned culturally by religion, by our families, by mainstream media, by lots of television programs, that there's a certain way to behave. But there is not. There is not one size fits all. And I see it as a sort of an equation. So, for example, for every death that I experience in my life, it's who I am and what I bring to that, my life experience. It's who that person is, their life experience, and how they die. So how they die will definitely be an impact into the way that I deal with that death. So, for example, I never feel that someone dies too soon or too young. When they die, they die. And in a way, when their number's up, their number's up, or their use-by date is up. So it's part of a bigger mystery. But I am able to stand at the funerals of young children, of stillborn babies, of young toddlers, of teenagers, even when they take their own life. It took me a while to adapt to really get that one, because when teenagers take their own life, say under 18, just as a line somewhere, I found that very challenging. It took me some years to really be able to sit with that in a neutral way, so that I could be of the best service that I could. I could do it. I could speak at that funeral with a clarity and to be of assistance, but somewhere I didn't quite embody that. And then maybe, about 10 years in, I thought, okay, now I get it, because I see that we're all part of the mystery. No one has the answers. And what we're looking at is, when someone dies, is a very small microcosm of something. But you have to come back out into a bigger picture and know that no one has all the answers, that it might seem something, but when you put it in context of everything, it's a small thing. But we're lost into it because we're emotionally connected.
Yes. I also, over the course of my life, have come to realize that there is a grand picture, sort of like a vast jigsaw puzzle, and we're all a piece, and we can't assume anything or interpret just the individual piece. So if a teenager commits suicide, which is devastating on the personal level, in the larger picture, we have no idea how that fits.
But, I would challenge you on that, because when you say something like that is devastating, then you are putting an overlay on that. But sometimes people find it a relief that for that person, that their suffering is over.
I'm very happy that you're challenging me on this, because I feel that I'm trying to voice for others how most people feel.
Yeah.
But I have to admit that I no longer feel that way. I would have when I was younger. There was a suicide in my family when I was younger. My grandmother committed suicide, and there was a ripple through the entire family. But I feel now that for me it would be very different, but just trying to honor how people usually initially feel.
Absolutely.
But please say more. I very much welcome it.
So what I would start with, at the moment, for the last 2 years, I've been having a really big thing about language, because what I'm doing is I'm going back and back and trying to unpack what we're dealing with. So, for example, the phrase commit suicide is left over from when it was an illegal action to kill yourself. So the state can kill you with the death penalty, but you weren't allowed to kill yourself. So suicide is to kill oneself, homicide to kill another, but commit suicide is because you're committing a crime. So that phrase in our language is completely unhelpful for people. So I have spent the last 10 years reframing that, or just choosing not to use that language.
I
And
know, I noticed that you did not use that phrase exactly. So say again how you are, what language you are using.
The language I'm using is that someone has killed themselves, or if it needs to be a little bit softer because it's very raw, then I would say that they have ended their own life, or the common phrase, they have taken their life. But every now and again, even though it's much longer to say that, sometimes I would say they chose to take their own life. They chose to end their life. They chose to kill themselves. Because what that does is it says it exactly how it is. And I say that from a place of kindness, because it allows people to move along their journey of healing and of coming to terms with that experience, and hopefully coming to accept that decision, whether they agree with it or not, whether they think it was a good decision or not, is up to them. But the only way to be able to be comfortable with that in some way that assists you to live on and not go into a pit of despair or a mindset that just continually asks questions.
Or a torment of guilt and self-blame is to honor that there was a choice involved, even with a younger person.
That's right. And we all have choices. We all make choices every day. And some of them we live to regret. And some of them we live to appreciate. But because we see life as the most important and valuable thing, but for some people their suffering is so great on an internal level or on an external level that they choose that they don't want to live anymore. And so I honor that.
Yes, yes. And I think it's such an important conversation that is rarely had. And I honor that too. I want to know, I want you to finish your thought. And I also want to remember to ask you, how does that coincide with a built-in expiration date, which is just a belief that I share with you?
Right. And I don't know the answers. So, but in the last maybe 10 years, I have fallen more and more in love with the mystery. So I don't need answers. I don't even ask the questions now. But that allows me to be with everybody in the most expansive and useful way I can. And clearly it works, because otherwise you would not be bothering to interview me about death and dying if I didn't have anything useful to say. And so when I come to this interview, I come with all the people that I have worked with over the last 25 years. We all come to give you the answers that may or may not be useful for other people, because everyone has to work it out for themselves. But we hope that we're, anybody that works in the death field, you cannot work in that field and not learn certain things. And people learn different things. But death is one of the greatest teachers. And if you can find something in there that is even one thing in this interview, then that's a good day for me. You don't have to agree with it all, because it's my experience that I'm trying to share. But sometimes that takes another 10 years to come to bear fruit. So I don't know any of the answers. I am just sharing with people my embodied experience of 25 years of working. The term I use is on that coal face, which I'm not sure that translates into American.
Can you explain that term a little more?
Well, they're just, if you're a miner, you're working on the coal face, you're chipping away at the coal, and you have to be physically there to do it. And that experience is in your being, in your body. And so for me, the experience of sitting with families around the kitchen table, sitting at the bedside of people who are dying, being at the funeral of people who have died suddenly or unexpectedly, whether that's children, whether that's people who have taken their own lives, whether that's elderly people who, there's a lot of joy that they've gone, but the grandchildren are sad because their experience is sad. So it's different for everyone. And so that experience I see as a great privilege, because it teaches me not only about death and the reality that it's coming, it also teaches me a lot about living fully. And so after some time, I just thought, you know, it's impossible to die too soon. And especially if you believe in God or you believe in a sort of religious or spiritual aspect to life, then how can that be? I mean, I don't bother to try and find an answer to that, but if people trust that everything's as it should be, then their death is timely. It's just our perception that it's too soon or they have more to give. But people's lives are complete when they die. They are full. And that, I find, is a very useful concept to offer to people at a funeral, because no one else is saying that. If everyone else is saying, oh, they died too soon, this is terrible, this is devastating, this is...
Right, they're saying it's tragic and so sorry for your loss. And but I very much am on the same page with you here. There was something that you said that I wanted to dig into with you.
You have to grab it while it's like life. Just pass it by. So
there are some things. So you're embracing the mystery, and I've noticed, it came back to me, I've noticed that, well, it's totally obvious that in Western society, we try to sanitize death. We make like death doesn't exist. We don't let people see death. We don't let people degrade naturally. We wrap them in plastic within these very heavy-duty coffins.
Well, and you pump them full of toxins, and I think this is particularly relevant. I just had a conversation with someone in the apartment where I'm staying 5 minutes before I walked in here to do this with you, which just was really simple. And I was saying that because the practice of embalming is so particularly American, it's not a practice that is a natural response to death elsewhere. Occasionally people are embalmed. It's not a given like it is in America. So when our children, when we see dead bodies elsewhere, they are what I would say is a natural dead body. They have been alive. They've either died slowly or they've died suddenly. But that body is as it is. It's not pumped full of toxins or embalming fluid to make it look alive. And so we are able to see it for what it is, which is an empty shell. And I see children all the time elsewhere who will look at that dead body at an open coffin funeral, and they will say, as they're looking over the coffin like this with their little friend, and they'll say something like, oh, that's not Zenith, she's not there, or that's not Grandpa, that's not Nanny. Because children can see so clearly that the body is empty. The spark, the essence, the consciousness, the being, whatever it is that makes us who we are, is gone. So our children are now getting, and have all, Indigenous children will all have, that's unbroken. But the more children are allowed to be around death in its natural form, they understand it much clearly. So if they have pets or animals that die and people take those pets, the dead bodies away, those children are not incrementally learning that, oh, that was their pet. It's got Fluffy, let's say, if it's a cat. And then they get to touch it, they get to see that it's dead, they get to see that it's just sort of empty, that life has gone. But what Americans see, if they do see a body and it's embalmed, is this interrupted life and death. It's a bit like some of American society. It's sort of completely fake. And so you're not able to get a proper bearing on that, because something in you tells you that there's something not quite right with that. And because we all have that inherent knowledge that life and death are a part of our existence. And in a way, death is natural and it's also sacred. And, you know, without getting into the big philosophical approach. So by embalming bodies, you are completely warping people's ability to come to terms in a way with something that is very natural. And I would say it's part of a grandparent's role to die, to teach the grandchildren what it means to lose someone you love. But because we think, oh, we know that you get old and you die. But in a way, because once the grandparent's gone, we all move up a step closer. So our parents then become the eldest people in our family. And they are then, if we believe in a natural order, they will die next.
You know, on a personal note, I'm about to turn 63 and my parents are alive. So my family has longevity, and one parent is 91 and he's remarried to someone who's about 85. And then the other is 86 and she's remarried to somebody who's 94. And when I broach the subject of death and dying with them, very occasionally, because they don't bring it up, they really don't have much interest in it. My mother, who has a very natural affinity for gardening, and I feel that that is her spiritual life.
Yes.
I feel more assured when she simply tells me something like, you know, I'm okay with it. But there's no discussion. And my father seems more baffled at the possibility. He knows it's in his future, even he's so healthy, he might live to be over 100. But there's kind of a childlike sense of overwhelm, not really wonder about death. And do you have any ideas about how to, or what to do? You know, I don't want to push myself on them. I brought it up because I said to them, you guys, I'm now entering into my final years and I'm interested in death. You know, we can speak about this openly. But they're like, eh.
That's right. But I would encourage people to think about it a bit like sex. So we have a generation who are open and excited and public about speaking about sex and our sexual activity or our sexual desires or our problems or whatever. But that generation of people generally didn't do that for whatever reason, because it wasn't part of a cultural norm. So of course, everyone had sex because otherwise you wouldn't be there. Or maybe you adopted, I don't know. But so we as a I'm also 60 now, so we as a generation feel that that's something, and if we work in that field, we want to talk about. But for a lot of people, they don't need to discuss it. They haven't got to be that, to live that long without watching their other friends come and go, to live and die. So they know all about it, but they just don't need, it seems a lot of people don't need to discuss it in detail. But they'll acknowledge, of course, they're not in denial. They just don't really want to discuss it. But so there are two things I would say to that. One is you could communicate to them that it would be helpful to you to know what they, if they have any wishes that they would like to influence what happens when they are dying and when they are dead. So a lot of people want to move to what do you want, how do you want your body to be disposed of, and what sort of ceremony you want. But I think more importantly than that is about how do you want to die? What's important for you? So, because if someone is elderly and they're going to die and they do not want to do that in a hospital, they do not want to be kept alive at any cost. So for example, let's say you had a conversation with your mother about that if she died in the garden, she had a heart attack or she had a stroke and she was just probably going to die in that garden, and you came out. Now, your immediate reaction probably would be to ring an ambulance and they would come and take her. But for example, she may say to you, you know what, if that happens to me, just let me lay in that garden and die under the tree. feeling all my beautiful familiar plants around me, supporting me, and let my last view be of the leaves of the tree, the blue sky, rather than the fluorescent lights and beeping of the emergency department or
I'm
the
so
clatter of the ambulance.
so happy that you're bringing this up, because just to listen to the description is so beautiful and natural. And
But what it means is you need to know that that's her wish so that you don't make the call to the ambulance. But also, that's what I'm saying, your work for one cup of tea a day would be to be able to sit with her while she dies unexpectedly and not do anything. The same as if you went to visit her and she had died either in the armchair, on the kitchen floor, or in the garden, in the bathroom floor, whatever. So instead of picking up the telephone, you would fall to your knees and you would sit with her and be fully present to that experience and let your emotional response arise rather than...
I am right there with you. Rather than doing what I'm supposed to do or what society says I'm supposed to do, if I've had that conversation with my mother and she's made it clear to me, then I'm simply joining her in her wish. I'm not overriding a wish, and I'm also not succumbing to some obligation or compliance with society.
Yeah, but you have to be able to be present to it, which takes practice. So because we are so geared when we want to save someone's life to ringing an ambulance or the emergency services, whatever. So it's that you would sit with once a day to think, imagine it. Imagine your mum in the garden, that you come and find her. Let's say even if you don't have to sit with her while she's dying, but you just find her dead, which a lot of people may find them, even if that person has taken their own life, and you walk into that situation, then the practice is to be able to be present and do what is best for you, to allow that physical shock to pass through your body, and then to be able to use that time to communicate out loud, internally, with that dead body, with the spirit of that person, whatever you feel, and use that time, the bang of the immediacy as well as you can. Because if you don't give that some thought, the odds are that you will pick up the phone, the emergency services will come in, the body will disappear, and you're in the void of a community response to that.
Yes, I am fully present to what you are saying. And there's a couple of things I want to ask. One, there's a story in your book, The Intimacy of Death and Dying, of, I think it's a doctor who at some point is in the hospital on death's door, but he's able to hang on and come home because he's made his wishes known, and the family tells him that others are arriving and that they're going to get him home into his own bed. And then his cat sits with him. Am I remembering this correctly from your book?
I don't know. It's not ringing any. I know that our friend Marcus, when he died of HIV, he was a nurse, he wasn't a doctor, and he really wanted to die at home. So his friends went, who were other nurses, went in and took him out of the hospital. And I've just had that recently in the last few weeks with a friend who the hospital said, we can't let her out, she's going to die. And her husband, and she had motor neurons, and she had communicated with him in a conversation with me that it didn't matter what happened, she did not want to die in hospital. And so we had I said, do you get that? Do you hear what she's saying? And I turned to her and she couldn't speak anymore. And I said, so let me just get that clear. Are you saying whatever that even if you die, a few weeks short, you do not? And she went like this because she'd lost the use of her throat. And he really got it. And when they were in the hospital, she was having some sort of change of medical treatment. And the nurse said, we can't let her out because we think she's so close to death. And he's normally quite a very mild-mannered sort of guy. And it was sort of like this transformation. And he said, no, I am taking her home. And they literally picked her up, put her in the car, and they drove her home, and she died at home in the next 2 days. She would have died anyway, but she got to die in the beauty and surrounds, which is what her wishes were, rather than in distress, being supervised by other people. So the communication and the need for the others to participate in that, but also their ability to be present and act, not just sort of be in this, be influenced by the medical system, is really important.
Very important.
If that's what you want. Yeah.
Right, if that's what you want. And it is fascinating to hear that this mild-mannered husband, you know, had this transformation right then and there, which
because he was acting in his place of honor for his wife. And if it, you know how sometimes we can do something for someone else that we may not be able to do for ourselves, we'll stand up and defend them. It was like that. So it's
exactly, exactly. And, you know, even the title of the book that you co-wrote, The Intimacy of Death and Dying, you've spoken about both intimacy and tenderness. And I would think it's so much easier to connect intimately and tenderly when you're in your familiar surroundings or in the place where you'd prefer to be when you die.
It is. And what I would say is that, you know, because this may be useful, that sometimes if people are dying, they're usually exhausted. They don't have a lot of energy, surplus energy, because what they're doing is they're pulling in. So they're not so interested in what's happening in the world. They're not so interested in what's happening in the community. They're sort of interested in what's happening with their own immediate family and their children or their partner. And then they come to their body. They're interested in what's happening to their body. But even that, towards the very end of their life, they won't be interested in their body because they are preparing for the end of that life, for whatever they believe. And it's very clear. And so sometimes when I go, I don't even ask people what they're dying from. It's not important to me. It's not relevant to me. But if I only have a little bit amount of time, these are the 3 questions that I would ask someone. Is how do they want to die? How do they, what do they believe happens when they die with their body, with their spirit? They'll answer it in whatever way they want. And how do they want to be remembered? So those, you know, and you may only get very limited answers, but the information they supply you on those 3 questions can sustain you for with an incredible richness, generally. So it doesn't need to be a whole big, long process. And even if you get to ask one of those questions, which is what do you believe will happen when you die? I find that if I share the answer of that with everyone at the funeral as the celebrant, that alone can make a huge amount of difference to how people heal or come to terms or accept or move through that experience as the bereaved.
Yes, I can imagine so, because in my conversations with my mother, she has revealed that she thinks that we just go back to the earth. And that alone is very comforting. And even though she wasn't interested in really having an in-depth conversation about death, when she said that to me, somehow I realized that I have some of her mannerisms. Sometimes on the telephone, people mistake me for her, and that she lives within me. But I wouldn't have realized that unless we had opened the door to even talking about it, even just a little bit.
Yeah. So you don't need to go on and on and on. You don't need to sort of keep unpacking and trying to get to some other layer, because really it's sort of your fascination with death that is at play. So she's given you that piece of information, and if you just let that land, then you can feel something like, oh, that's lovely. And it's enough. Because what she's saying in that is a huge amount of other things. She's saying she's okay with dying. She's lived a long life, you know, that she's in tune with nature. She sees it as a natural part of everything. you know, and other things. I mean, it's your relationship, you'll know, but it's just not a complex thing, I don't think.
Yeah, it's actually a very simple, inevitable thing that we all know from very early. Another word you've used several times is embodied. And I love it that you're using that word, because I've come to realize that we need to be in touch with our bodies and locate where we're feeling in our bodies in order to have an integrated whole experience of ourselves.
Yeah.
And if we haven't done that before dying, where we're leaving the body, we're kind of disassociated or out of touch with ourselves, and therefore not as able to be present through the process of dying. So there's a lot of preparation that people can make by...
But worse than that, we're not in touch with living if we're not in our bodies, because it's our body that gives us a human life. And the human body is so amazing. And the potential to live fully within that body. But it you know, I mean, why would you do anything else? But what I would say when I use the term embodied in this conversation is because that's what I'm saying, my learning lands in me, because generally I'm sitting with people. It's the, you know, it's intimate, but it is also powerful, mysterious. It's the meaning of life itself.
Yes. So I think where I'm going with this is that in Western society, we've become so intellectual and mental that that goes together with the way that we've handled death and trying to clean it up and make it disappear publicly, you know, that it's not integrated into society such as it is in India, where people see funeral pyres. And that
and it's the same as when you're talking to someone. If someone is giving you an answer from here, from their brain and their intellect, and you can't feel them when you're talking to them, that is not going to be such a in-depth, transformative conversation with someone. But if you have, like, sometimes you can sit with someone, you don't even have to speak apart from hi, or sometimes you don't. Sometimes people will sit next to me and they'll say, I just have to say, you know, that I'm sitting next to you, but that there's this incredible calm that I have, or whatever. So you don't actually have to physically do anything, but you have to be it. And so if you come to someone at the bedside or the family at the kitchen table and you are busy, you know, formulating questions, working out what to do, that doesn't assist, because they're already like that in their response to the diagnosis or to the death itself, especially if it's sudden. So if I come calm, I come present, I come neutral, then I can and I come kind, I can then respond to what's in the room with those people and to each one of them independently. So it's sort of like dancing. You have to find the rhythm with the steps that person's dancing, and meet them in that place. And I can only do that if I am present and still. And so I bring all of my experience, all of my awareness, all my learning from those years and from all those people. I bring all of that to the kitchen table. I bring all of that to the bedside. And then I respond to what is needed from me. I don't go in thinking, right, this is a tick list of questions I'm going to ask. I don't have a tick list. I don't even have a piece of paper until I need one. And then but I find it much better to have a conversation with someone, meet them where they're at, and then eventually have that discussion. Because what it does is their nervous system will settle, because they are in a connected, intimate conversation with you about the situation that they find themselves in. And I'm participating in that, but I'm not driving it. I'm not the interviewer. I'm not any of those things. I'm in it with them, just like a regular person. And when I need to, I will then guide it where it needs to go. And people are willing then to give that information. They will focus and they'll give it to you because they feel that you've given them that kindness to just listen to them. But of course you can't listen to them forever because you've got a job to do. So you have to find that place of allowing them to settle, but getting what I need from that conversation.
It's so profoundly true what you're saying about the dance and the connection without a to-do list. Because if you can meet a person where they're at and flow with them, and they sense that you're not afraid, and that your experience is holding the space for them, then the nervous system can settle down, which is where all of the, hum. Yeah. And then, as you say, the logistics will have to take care of themselves, which I just want to add, it makes me realize that my parents are so selfless in the sense that they've taken care of that to-do list. They've been so generous and concerned with their children and family members and getting their will done and, putting everything in place. And so the best I can do for them is be very present and hold the space in whatever way that evolves once they're there, which they're not. They're very healthy right now.
That's right. But I just want to give you something else to think about. And that is, so just like changing the words around commit suicide is the concept of holding space. Because I find that concept now, it took me a while, but after years, I realized that that's a very patronizing or matronizing approach, because you are not dying. So it goes back to, death walking, that you're walking with them. So the person you're talking to is actually dying. You're just walking alongside them. So you don't know what it's like to face death like they are. So the concept that you're holding space for them to do that, I find very patronizing. And what I see is that what I am doing is I am co-creating that experience with them, because they have the juicy bit. Let's say they have the meat. I might be the sandwich. I come at the beginning and I'm there at the funeral, but they're what's really important. And so when I have the concept that I'm co-creating that, I'm bringing what I have to offer them, and they are giving to me what they have to share in order for us to make that experience the best it can be, so that they die well, and the people accompanying them or who are left behind have a healthy bereavement. I'm playing my part in that. But I won't know what it's like to die until it's actually happening to me. So I don't want to be, because I find it impossible to think about holding space. It's an old redundant term. Whereas if you think, yep, we're moving into this and we are going to co-create that experience together. They're creating it because they're in it, and I'm creating it because they're inviting me to come along and share what I have to offer in that. My familiarity with death and with ceremony and with the legal side, the emotional side. But the concept of holding space is not, it was useful, but it's not really, if you're moving into that field, if you're wanting to get the best out of a situation with people that you love, or if you're working in that field, then the concept of co-creation is much more productive, much more respectful, and much more useful and kind to yourself and to the others, because it puts a lot of pressure on you in an experience that you will never know how you're going to be until it's happening to you.
Yes, yes. I love it that you're examining terms that we take for granted. And as you explained why holding space no longer works in your view, I realize that it's such a limited term, as well as, you feel that it may be patronizing, but it's also limited, or matronizing, but it's limited, and where they're going is expansive. Whatever it is, the mystery is beyond anything that I could hold.
That's right. And we will only, while we're healthy and well, then our experience of, and that's what I'm saying, it's a practice to explore death, explore how you might feel, explore how you might feel if you're going to be bereaved by the death of a child, all of that. But you will never know the reality of that until it's happening to you, and most people don't want it to happen to them. But it, it's the mystery. It's magnificent in all its complexity, and it's a luxury. Because in some countries, people are dying on the side of the road and people have to walk on. They just have 2 minutes with that person, with that body, they have to leave it on the side of the road. And a whole range of other things that don't look like what we have in America, in countries where we're not at war. So you also have to see all that as an absolute luxury.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for mentioning that. Who would ever have really considered death as a luxury to have it in the way that that is now being offered by you and others? Can you share with us some information if people want to reach out to you or find out more about where they can get this kind of support in their local area?
Well, I think in America, then you could look at the Natural Home Funeral Alliance. You could look at the Green Burial Movement.
There's Jerry Grace Lyons.
Jerry Grace Lyons in Sebastopol. There's a conference, actually, which is why I've just taught at the Open Center in New York, and I'll probably come back to do that next year and teach in Seattle. And so generally I come when I'm invited, because it's no good trying to talk to someone if they don't want to listen to you. It's much better to be invited to participate in something. And so there is lots happening in America. There are other people like me who are just doing that work quietly and offering it up so that people can get it before they need it, which is much more useful than getting it at the funeral or at the bedside. If you start to explore it, you can cultivate it and grow it into something very beautiful so that when you need it, it's strong and healthy inside you. And so really, with the internet, you can Google whatever phrase you want, but there are many people teaching, and you just have to find the one that really speaks to you or that touches a place in you that wakes something up, and you think, oh, I never thought about it like that, but that feels simple, that feels good.
Yes, yes. And your website is?
thenaturaldeathcarecenter.org. So I have a small charity in Australia, and I work out of that because for me it was important that it came with an integrity that people assume charities have. That may be a mistaken assumption, but anyway, that was my intention. And that because while I'm busy supporting people who invite me to be part of that journey with them, something else is very busy supporting me to be able to do that.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm sure there are people watching today internationally who would like to make a donation and explore more. And of course, there's the book, The Intimacy of Death and Dying.
Yeah, and there's also a small film. Some LA filmmakers came and made a film called Zen and the Art of Dying. But I'm just, we're all a bit like religion or spirituality or diets. We're all different paths to the same thing, which is a healthy way of living and dying, to die as well as we can, to experience bereavement the best way we can. And you'll notice that I haven't said the word grief at all, because I'm talking about bereavement, which is a state of being that isn't loaded, whereas we're being funneled into a grief funnel, that is the natural response to death. And I would question that, because so for example, everything you're saying, when your mother dies, you're not going to go into grief. You're going to go into sadness. You're going to go into reflection. You're going to go into appreciation. You're going to go into a whole range of emotions. But I don't think grief will actually be one of them.
How would you define grief?
I tend to stick with, it's complicated, and I can't do it in a concise way. But what I would say is that it's a different experience for everyone, and it's the equation that, so some deaths will warrant grief as a response, absolutely. Mm-hmm. But a lot of deaths, the default position is sadness, deep sadness, not grief. So
I think grief has an element of shock to it. And that if you're in a journey of death walking together as a family, that there's preparation involved so that you won't be hit with that unexpected shock. You still may be unprepared for the depth of the feeling, but maybe that's the discernment between bereavement and grief.
I think grief is really about the person. So in that equation, it's about the person that's left alive. It really sort of has nothing to do really with the person who's dying, because often people have, and it's a part of a human existence, and it's about a it's complicated, it has many layers to it, and it's part of what I'm teaching about, which is, I can't give it in 2 seconds at the end of a long interview, because I'm sort
well,
of,
that can be our part 2. We can do another interview sometime and really examine
responses to death, responses to loss. Sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your wisdom and your love, and for doing this work, which is sorely needed and very much welcomed by me and those I know. And
really, we can all do it well. It's not really about looking out, trying to find someone to tell you about it. It's about going in, because we all have it. If we are human beings, and we've got a brain that works and an emotional system that works, then we have the ability to do that well.
This has been The Only Meaningful Conversation. Our guest today is Zenith Virago. I'm Amy Torres. Namaste.